Опять передаю слово своему коллеге Кристиану. Christian, are you ready for your next slide?
Yes, ready to rock and roll.
Okay, great. So we see your screen.
Good. Thank you, Vlad, for your presentation. Although I not understand all the words, I really understand what you were talking about and the malware families you were mentioning, and that's great stuff. And I think in one of your slides you mentioned the gamma reading group, and definitely that those ones are part of my slides here as well. And honestly speaking, if I talk about the Ukraine, and I just give this the title of a testbed for cyber warfare, because with all respect, if you look at the different cyber threats going on in the world and targeting a country, I would say for sure that the Ukraine has a pretty unique situation. Besides as well, if you look, for example, South Korea, that also has like a specific actor always attacking them. So from us as threat experts, from threat analysts, looking at the Ukraine, it's always very interesting because it's most likely the place where a lot of new techniques are being observed or being tested by adversaries. So if you look from the statistics from last year alone, and this is from the Secret Service from the Ukraine, more than 482 cyber attacks were being observed hitting the Ukraine. That on itself is for like a country, it's pretty big, and that's actually the amount of cyber attacks they observed that were visible to them. But it could be even more that you're seeing, and there's a ton of activity there going on. And one of the things we were looking at as well is like, and I'm not going to highlight this in this presentation because time would be too limited to cover everything, but in our team, we see more and more that misinformation campaigns are being used, right? And we've seen it with the elections in the US, we have seen it with the elections here in Europe, but also for many years that there's this misinformation campaign going on towards the Ukraine. And you see my background slide here, you see some really nice colors. No, it's not a painting of my daughter that used colors, but actually it's one of the programs we were using where we actually track social media, which we feed with a lot of information around these are known bots that are spreading fake news or misinformation. And when we put in, for example, some hashtags around on Twitter, some certain topics, and I put in here a few topics around COVID-19, Ukraine, Donbass, a few of those topics. And you see this picture slowly building out over hours, over days. And for us, it's really interesting to see the patterns, what is happening, who's talking about what. Are they related to bots? Is it a collection of bots we can identify to be part of a larger firm or something like that? And at the bottom here, you see my screen where we analyze the URLs of the Twitter accounts, the stats, we break them up, and all those details we feed actually back into our machine learning model that is tracking all these misinformation campaigns. And in this case, I took like a week of information around Ukraine and started to visualize it over time. And this is a great overview from Booz Allen Hamilton. That they just released a report about cyber threat activity from nation states. And this is a really nice list of like where you see on the right side the kind of political, geopolitical events or daily life events happening. Let's say, for example, June 28th in 2017, we see the anniversary of Ukraine's post-USSR constitution, the constitution days, and a day before the outbreak of NotPetya. So there's really a lot of historical events or days happening in the Ukraine where there is a kind of response with a cyber incident happening. And this is just from 2016 and 17 and 15. Now, we can talk about the past, right? And there will be a few slides where I just highlight a few things from timeline. But how cool will it be to have like a real lifetime experience in what's going on in the Ukraine? So I just will break down my slideshow for this. And this is actually here is an internal dashboard we're using. So let me quickly see. Yeah, the dates are still fine. But let's zoom in on the Ukraine. And as you see now, for example, from a global perspective, the data is from February 1st till today. You see our telemetry data here. So over 36,357 campaign detections we have discovered since February 1st globally. This is globally. And you see we have like almost 30,000 unique IDs, MD5, so the hashes from malware, which we were tracking over 52,000 organizations around the globe. And this is just global, right? But what about Ukraine, right? Let's see what we can show about Ukraine. You see already that it's showing me 30 million detections in just almost 3 months' time. So I click on it. It takes a little bit of time because I'm connecting in from the Netherlands and zooming in on actually connecting towards the US. So now my screen is black and you see the Ukraine highlighted up. And actually I can go down in our internal threat dashboard. And here you see the familiar 13 million detections we have seen so far. Close to 2 million unique MD5s. That's a big number, right? You see already like in 2 months time, out of the big chunk of like millions of unique MD5s, 2 million are already coming from the Ukraine, and with 2,000 unique MD5 campaign IDs. So that's a lot. And at the same time over here, you see in my dashboard, so all these sensors we are having, so endpoint sensors and all telemetry we're having, and also the information we feed into the system, we can filter it down on the whois information. So if its IP address is submitting from an IP address, we can do a whois. Well, and actually it gives us back the sectors. So based on the whois information, you would say, hey, telco is a large sector, which makes logic because a lot of customers have their IP range from a telco provider. So if you want to look at the real sector information, this is where we have our customer ID mapped to just purely the sector. You can actually see that outsourcing and hosting and media communication, the government in the Ukraine, they are the top sectors we're seeing in the last 2 months being hit by cyber attacks. Now I can even zoom down here where I say like, okay, so what are some of the top hashes here? And we can zoom on that as well. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time for the presentation to do this all, but actually we can take the top 100, top 500 of hashes and see which malware families are most dominant and prevalent in the Ukraine. An interesting piece, which I will highlight in my next slide of my deck, is as well here the MITRE attack techniques we observe being used in Ukraine at the moment. And as you can see over here, this is actually a nice diagram flow of how many files we are getting submitted and which type we're getting submitted. So internally, a PUP stands for potentially unwanted program. So it doesn't say it's malicious, but it has enough functionality where we think like, is it something really you want to have in your network, yes or no? And virus and Trojan are two categories which we're using for different types of malware families. Assume 34, those are samples there where we think like, hey, they contain malicious elements. We can't convict them immediately. So we need analysts or some of our smart system technology to identify those. And when assume 34 is then classified, it will end up in being a Trojan or virus. And as you can see over here, let's say, if I can pick a date here, let's see if I can get this running. Yeah. So May 17, you see we had close to 13,000 files being submitted to us, just purely malware on the 17th of May, a few days back. So those are a huge amount of numbers we're seeing being submitted. And that's for every country, to be honest. But just for one day, 13,000 viruses, and I'm not sure if I can see the Trojans, but Trojans also to be at 27,000, so 40,000 malicious files in one day from one nation. So that's a lot of stuff. Now let's go back to my slide here. So I just showed you the MITRE attack techniques hitting the Ukraine. And in my introduction presentation earlier during this event, I discussed that we're in McAfee and especially in ATR and some other teams, we're big fans of the MITRE attack technique framework. Actually, we're contributor to the framework, and I've authored a few techniques as well, because I really believe in this this kind of framework. Why? It gives you visibility, and when it gives you visibility, it can help you to pinpoint where in my network are gaps. So if a technique is being used against me or my sector, do I have the technology, do I have the tools, do I have the people and the processes in place that can show me this visibility? So if you would zoom in on the Ukraine here, user execution, spear phishing attachments, obfuscated that whole top stuff. So I would say from commonly used ports and upwards, like spear phishing link, this is all what I would say campaigns where people are using weaponized documents and actually sending it to your company. And what happens next? So for example, let's take the spear phishing link or the spear phishing attachment. The user opens it up. There's a macro or some other stuff in it, which I will explain later. There's some scripting being used, command line interfaces being used, and then information is exchanged over a custom command and control protocol. That could be a new protocol, but also like normally port 80 or 443. And then the exchange is happening. And having this visibility is great because honestly, that user execution, the scripting, the attachments, it shows you something. And honestly, I'm not sure how long you are in this industry, but I remember those times when you opened up Microsoft Office and you had this nasty paperclip actually every time asking you questions like, can I help? Is there something I can do? And we call it Clippy, right? And it was actually part of Office 95, 97. And the great feature about Office 95, 97 that Microsoft introduced was the macros. So you could actually automate tasks you were doing over and over again. So, and at that time, 95, 2003, we saw Word Basic and actually Visual Basic being used already for some early malicious macro attacks. But then Office 2000 was introduced, and you see the amount of macros being disabled by default had an impact, and people were not paying attention and were not using it a lot. But honestly, from 2014 and onwards, we see the malicious macros just jumping up. It's crazy. It's like this big sinus wave. It's coming back again. And a lot of things we're seeing these days are actually starting with an attachment with a macro and then with a Microsoft Office file extension. It could be a docx, it could be an Excel sheet, it could be a PowerPoint. And I will explain why, because this is a technical session and I will go a little bit more into details into the technical. I just saw a question popping up. Please, great, ask your questions in the window. After my session, I will stay for 10 minutes answering those questions in the chat window. So please don't hesitate, but definitely I will answer those questions. So just before we take a little bit more a dive into the technology behind Microsoft Office, there's a lot of stuff you can do actually with a macro. You can actually completely script and automate a lot of tasks, so it can run automatically. It can download files, it can create files, executing files. A popular one is the injection of shellcode. It can simulate keystrokes. There's a lot of stuff you can actually do with a macro if you know how to use it. Here's an example. So you see this macro code. In the top, you see already the commands, and you don't need to be a programmer or a rocket scientist to understand what the function does. So URL download to file A simply uses the URL mon.dll on the Windows operating system and starts to download a file. The out and open, yeah, it will automatically open up, runs the macro when the document is being opened. And you see over here, the code goes on, and actually when the macro is opened and the document is opened, the file will be downloaded from the URL compromise.com/payload.exe, and shell will actually run that piece of malware or Trojan backdoor, whatever. It runs from this shell code. So honestly, and this is a beautified code, right? Because normally this was I would say, early 2014, 15, you saw this clear text code, but nowadays, and I will show you an example later, the code is heavily obfuscated. Why? Because they try to make it difficult for us as analysts to look at the code, but also they try to fool machine learning models that learned to read those functions like auto open, URL download, and stuff like that. And this is an example from a recent Ukrainian attack. You see already this is more obfuscated, although you see the clear wscript.shell, you see some of those other words, but actually we beautified this code. And still you see those really fancy names there like object KKOMSO and stuff like that. That's exactly what they're doing with all tricks to try to bypass machine learning models, but also make it difficult for us to understand what is going on. So why is Microsoft Office so popular? Especially if you look at version 2003 and 2007 and up. Well, your document, and this is a great thing if you want to test it on your machine. If you have a docx file, for example, just do a right click and open it up with what is called a 7-zip extractor. You would see a whole directory structure. So over here you can see, so my example.doc contains a folder with macros. It contains like all kinds of subcategories which contain information. And what you see if there's a malicious macro, it will be in this directory. But there are tons of ways to actually hide your code in all these different fields, because a lot of these functions in the Office compound file binary format are not described. If you look up the documents from Microsoft, for example, I think you're going through over hundreds of pages describing the different functions, and a lot of things are not described. So honestly, if I would put my code in one of these fields or one of these subfiles, it will be executed. And that's where you see a lot of cyber criminals and also nation state criminals are abusing this and looking for where can I stash and hide my code. Perfect example, September 2019. And it was actually PowerPoint about Ukrainian activities and things. And I did the same, as you can see on the right side. So I did like a right click on my presentation, and I did with 7-zip extracted, and you get all this information. And one of the XML files contained actually this link, which I highlighted in the bottom. So you see my blue arrow pointing to a script, and actually it downloads a script from that location when you open up this presentation. So from an endpoint security perspective, if you scan this file, nothing wrong, right? It's just a PowerPoint. There's nothing obvious going on. Nothing you can actually see on the outside or inside or in the code that actually shows malicious activity, because the URL, it's down into the properties of the XML files, and most of the technology doesn't scan there until it's executed. So if this URL would be flagged as suspicious, of course, some technology would actually detect this. But for now, no, this won't be detected. And this is where they actually abuse these kind of things. So jumping from September 2019 to more recent attacks, let's focus on this group. And I know Vlad, you also highlighted one of these attacks as well from them. But the Gamma Reading Group is aka Primitive Bear. As an industry, we strongly believe this is a nation-state sponsored group, and they seem to be active since 2013. And although people are making different assumptions, what we for sure can say that this group is a pro-Russian group. And that primarily targets actually the Ukraine. And if you look at the different campaigns since 2013, the sectors they mostly attack is government, utilities, and military. Recently, they also abused some Ukrainian embassies in Hungary, for example, to do their campaigns, so that they're going sometimes outside the borders. But from most of the telemetry we, as a McAfee, observe, but also others in the industry, we see this group is really active targeting the Ukraine. So what is their biggest attack vector at the moment? So they use a few, I would say, predominant malware families they're using. So it's like 1 or 2 Trojans they're using. But the way they try to access your network is by social engineering with weaponized documents. So what they really try to do is make those documents really attractive to open. So you get an email that sounds really promising. Then you see these attachments and you think like, hey, this could be the real thing. And before you know, you have opened it up and the stuff starts executing it. So here again, if you go to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and you would actually map out the techniques being used by the Gamma Reading group, these are some of the techniques that they are using. So they're using spear phishing attachments, they're using PowerShell and command line interface. Of course, they're depending on the user execution. Again, PowerShell scripting, they obfuscate their files, and they're exfiltrating their data over a command control channel, so like port 80 or 443. Now, the cool thing is, if you have something like this in front of you, and you know, like, hey, I'm in, for example, let's take one of the sectors I highlighted in my demo. Let's say I'm in the government, right? And I know this group is attacking the government sector in the Ukraine. They're using spear phishing attachment as an initial access. So the question you could ask yourself as a government institute is like, okay, do I have the technology in place that will highlight this technique? So if some spear phishing attachment is coming up, is there a way I have the visibility to detect this? Or if PowerShell is executed, or if there's a scheduled task being registered on my machines, is there a technology or process in place in my organization that will give me this information? And another thing you can do if you're having a security operations center, for example, is like, hey, you're observing a spear phishing attachment and you see some PowerShell activity. You understand that if you think it's gamma reading, that their next steps will be, hey, they want to do file system discovery, they want to do some remote file copy, and at the end they will exfiltrate data. So is there a system in place, or is there technology in place that can block this? Or do you see, for example, that is there a way already that I can actually block the exfiltration over command and control? So a lot of, I would say, tools and things how you can use the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And as we in ATR, so my team, McAfee's Advanced Threat Research team, for every blog we're posting, we're actually putting those MITRE ATT&CK techniques in there because it really helps our customers to map this out, to visualize the attack and understand if they can actually detect these attacks in the future as well. So if you look at the Gamma Reading, and the reason they popped up on the radar again was like they were actually one of the first nation states that were actually abusing the COVID-19 theme. So they created really believable documents coming from the Ministry of Health in the Ukraine, and they set up an infrastructure. And actually, these documents contained simply an embedded link, as I demonstrated before, and that link would actually open up something bad from the other side. So, oh, and I forgot to mention here, the vulnerability where they were using was actually CVE 2017-0199. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're in the year 2020, and they're still using a vulnerability that is 3 years old, but still very successful in the field. If you look at this vulnerability, it's a Microsoft Office vulnerability, and it allows remote execution of code. If you're on this call and you recognize you're having one of these Office versions in your organization, please, please, please patch. I think it's sometimes a challenge, and we're patching our Windows operating systems mostly. But things like Office or other things are often forgotten or they're out of date and things like that. But honestly, if you see in the last 90 days, we had all over 2,000 hits on VirusTotal that were abusing this vulnerability. And still in the Ukraine, but also other nations in the world, we see this vulnerability being used. So the simplest way to already make it difficult to the attackers is actually patch your Office frequently, and so they actually you can stop them from abusing this vulnerability and attacking you with malicious documents. So how is the flow of the attack of Gamma-Redan happening towards with the COVID-19 theme or some other themes they're using? So as you can see on the left, it starts with an email with an attachment, and that attachment over here that contains a simple link, and that link is actually hidden in an XML file from the structure I showed you before. So that link goes to a website, and that website is hosting several template files. It sounds ridiculous, but that's the only way to pronounce it. But actually, it's a template file that they are abusing that will be downloaded back into your Office. And those files actually are containing script, so they're obfuscated macros with obfuscated code. And actually, what the code does, it actually opens up a command line or a shell, and it starts to download one of the other tools they have available depending on the victim that they are using. So and it could be like a backdoor, it could be a different Trojan and things like that. But actually the move from using this document and that actually downloads this template file and then in scripting, that's a technique we observed as Gamma-Redan doing it as a first group. But now we also see, for example, the Lazarus group, it's a North Korean actor, using the same technology, same technique to actually attack their victims. Well, I discussed earlier on, I showed you like a very simple a macro code which you could read. This is the stuff we're facing on a daily basis. So you see over here, create object, but then you see W script shell. So it wants to open up a shell, scripting file system object. You see that they actually really chopped up here the code to actually make it more difficult or to bypass some technology. Over here, I beautified the code again. So you see a write execute, and actually it starts here. It will do execute the script. So it will run the code here. So this is actually the stuff you're facing on a daily basis. So one of the tricks we observed being used by Gamma-Redan, and we were able to actually identify the tool they were using, is there are two ways they can actually do this to your organization, because they want to know which payload will work for your particular Office version or your particular company. So remember here where I said like, hey, the template files and a script needs to be sent to you. There's two ways to do it. So when they do this, number one is actually a tracking pixel in your email. So what they do is actually they send you an email, and in the headers, they actually do something like this. Image tag, the source, it's HTTP, Gamma-Redan.com with a tracking ID in base 64 code with width 1, 8.1. So it means you don't see this pixel. It's so small you won't see this pixel in your email. But what happens when you open up your email, it will download this pixel from this link, and over there they have like their logs running. So immediately they can see that, for example, sorry Vlad, I'm abusing you now, but that Vlad opened up the email and that they're now in this Office and that they're now in this email system. And what actually happens when you open up your email, the headers with the Office version from Outlook are being sent back. So the server owned by these actors, they have the log files, and exactly they know like, hey, the email we sent to this person with this tracking ID is coming back with Office 2003. Oh, perfect. For Office 2003, we need to actually use this kind of payload. But there's another trick. What you also can do, and this is what they are doing as well, is actually they're hosting here a web server. So the moment the victim opens here the email with the attachment and they open up the attachment, the file, it connects to the web server. And as you can see here at the bottom, with the user agent, you can actually see it will find out, oh, it's a Windows 64-bit system. They are using Microsoft Outlook 15.0. Okay, that's MS Office 16. So the code I need to use is Office 2016 64-bit. And then they push the code in this test document file. It's up and running on the server and it is downloaded into your campaign. It's a really fascinating process of how they automated this and how you can actually use this to give the right payload to the victims. And again, if you would actually get more familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the techniques being used, you can actually map out different campaigns and how they operate, the techniques they are using. And again, asking yourself, okay, how do I protect myself, or where actually, which technology gives me the visibility into these techniques so I can block and stop those attacks happening. So, and this is actually a test I did, and hopefully I don't get arrested for this, but I'm sure I'm not. But so how easy is it to find metadata? Because honestly, you can do the email trick, which is very offensive. Like if it doesn't work, still you have to send emails. The other one, actually, with the payload, you also have to send emails and prepare a lot of work. But there's also a really great passive way to find out which version of Office or what kind of users or what kind of technology a company is using. So with a history in pen testing and doing a lot of red teaming and training red teaming, one of the ways you can actually gather a lot of information about your victim is using open source intelligence. And using open source intelligence or passive intelligence, it leaves behind a very small footprint, and mostly people won't notice that you're actually gathering information about them. So what I did actually, I used a Ukrainian government website, and what I told with my tool is like, okay, go to that website, and no, you can ask for me, but I won't disclose this one. But from that website, please download all the documents you can find on the website, or documents that are containing the domain of this particular website. And as you can see, I had more than 821 documents downloaded, like 29 docs, docx, PDF, PowerPoints. And honestly, a lot of people forget to scrub their data. If they push like a PDF or they want to share documents or PowerPoints on their government or their company website, often they don't scrub their data. So still, who wrote the document is there. Maybe the printer name is in the document. It's a really valuable information. So what I did is, when I downloaded all these documents, then the next thing I was, okay, show me the usernames you found in these documents. And as you can see on the right side, I found 89 user accounts. Of course, Microsoft Corporation is not interesting, but here's a name. Oh, just go back here. Here's a name. This is a name. Here's some names. So there's some names I could maybe use as an attacker to social engineer or make an email far more credible, and actually allow people or attract people to click on that email. I found folders here where people were stashed their folders, software versions. So for sure, I knew which Microsoft Office or PDF version they were using in this government entity. So I could know which payloads would be successful. Similar for the Microsoft operating systems, like is it 32, 64-bit, and which version are they using? So combined with the operating system information, the software versions, the printers being used was fantastic, but also some of the usernames. All that data combined is for me a perfect way to pick the right payloads, the right things I need to prepare an attack. And this is exactly what groups like Gamma Reading, but other nation state groups are using to actually conduct really targeted spear phishing campaigns. One of the other things we did on Gamma Reading is like we analyzed a lot of those documents they have been using over the last months. So since January till May, all the type of documents they've been using for spear phishing campaigns. We analyzed the logs and then the command and control servers that they were been using. So on the left side here, you can see a list of all domains they have been using. And as you can see, hopto.org it's actually a DNS provider, so you can easily register and use a domain for 1 or 2 days for your campaign and then actually ditch it. So that's where you see a lot of hopto.org, 3utilities.com, but also myftp.biz. Those three are, I would say, major indicators of if you see URL activity in your org towards these three, I would say start to investigate or pay attention, because most likely that could indicate some malicious activity. Now, within our research company, of course, like in the research of our team, it's nice to have those domains, right? And it's nice to know that they were using. But honestly, if they register every time a new hopto.org, it's impossible for us to keep up and then actually all the time search for new domains. So what we're doing is we enrich that data from these domains. So we're looking for all kinds of traces, like the domain names, the phone numbers associated. Is there an email address that registers them? Can we find the company associated them, the net blocks, the geographic location, you name it. And all that information together is helping us to create a kind of profile. So, and that profile is really helpful because honestly, then we know for sure if Gamma Reading is registering new domain, which is in the DNA profile we created around them. It will pop up an alert for us, and we can investigate. And immediately, if we find new indicators, we push it into our GTI cloud, and it will protect our customers immediately against these threats. So these are ways how we actually look at the data, enrich the data, visualize the data, because visualization gives you far faster solutions and actually trends and spots where you can actually correlate and investigate. And then the ideal goal then is to act fast and protect our customers as soon as possible. So for the last part of my presentation, I just focused on the Gamma Reading group. There's another group, and this is the name that Dragos Security gave them. It's a group that is, I think, really interesting, and I will explain why. Their name is Xenotime, and they're actually known of targeting industrial controlled systems. So they're a nation state. They're targeting the utility sectors everywhere, where we would say. And what is unique, we would say, for them is actually they have tested in the field the Trisus malware. So they wrote a piece of malware, which was actually very interesting. We haven't seen that before. And that really triggered us to focus as well with many other of our competitors on this particular group, because they really were not shy of actually testing their software in the field. So let's build a little timeline here. Here we go. And I think for some of you, these names are familiar, right? Havex, Black Energy, Indestroyer. Most of you have faced the consequences of this happening in your country. And honestly speaking, 2015, 16, I remember 2016 for sure, because it was really during Christmas holidays that it was happening. And we worked really very close with some of our partners, but also connections in the Ukraine to help figure out what was happening and stop this threat from happening as soon as possible. So you can see this little timeline, but then in 2017, firstly, it didn't get a lot of attention. Like, hey, there's another ICS attack happening in the Middle East, but But what can we learn from that? And it's just like one facility seems to be affected, but it was actually stopped before it had an impact. So I would say from an analyst perspective, attacks on like critical infrastructure always has the attention because it can actually hit our society. It can hit our families and the people we love. So also as we as analysts are really focused on like, okay, who dares to attack these kind of things, right? And who has the guts and the nerve to do this? So that's where we really want to focus our analysis on and also learn from, okay, if they do things like this, how can we stop this? How can we detect this? Or how can we do things like this? So meet Triton. And Triton actually, that malware was actually the first targeting SIS. And SIS starts for a safety instrument system. It's actually a layer of security that is added in the line of ICS. On the right side, you can actually see where this actually sits in the loop of like a SCADA loop where you have your people or processes in place. So honestly speaking, the Schneider device they actually try to attack, they are used in like 18,000 plants around the world. So chemical plants, oil and gas, nuclear, and these plants are not designed to quickly change technology. Mostly when you look at like an energy plant, for example, or an oil and gas refinery, they're built with in the back of their head of like, okay, at least for 70 years, they need to work and they need to operate. So quickly changing systems or technology in and out, it's difficult and challenging. So that's why you see when they have a device in that plant, mostly it will sit there for the next 10, 15 years still there. So why were they targeting this particular system was a question we were asking ourselves. And honestly, if you look at how this system is working and operating, you need quite a lot of knowledge to understand how it operates. You need to go through documents and all kind of things and the network traffic to understand how it operates and why and how you can actually attack this. And this particular system is also designed for protecting human life. So it's really, I would say, if the operator failed to intervene, there are still this safety instrument system that actually can stop the disaster from happening. So it's a really critical component in the whole SCADA ICS design. So how did they operate the attack? And for a more detailed description of this attack, you can look at this blog post on Triton. Again, writing this link would probably take too long. But if you look at Triton malware McAfee Labs, you will definitely find it, the link in Google. So the attackers actually first got a footprint in the IT network of the victim, and unfortunately, the separation between the IT network and the customer network, so the SCADA network, it was not that solid. So they got hold of a sys engineering workstation. That's where they actually were uploading the malware and attacking the Triconex machine, and then maybe they were trying or maybe wanted to test if they could disable the system and actually maybe launch a cyber attack, maybe disrupt an oil and gas refinery. We don't know yet because honestly, thank God it was detected on the sys engineering works station and the protocols were happening and the traffic. Thankfully, the steps afterwards were blocked. That was fantastic. So here you see we have the fortune to work together with Schneider and to get a copy of the code and do some in-depth analysis of it. But as you can see, it was an executable that masked itself as being a Triconex application, trilog.exe, and it contains a lot of Python scripts. And it was actually putting something in memory and trying to do the backdoor implant. And then the final payload was missing. but for sure we saw this was all working, and by reversing it, what you can see on the right side, we were for sure that this was definitely effective and could have a very nasty impact on the victims. So one of the cool things we did, I showed you in my first presentation an hour back around this little device we built with our 3D printers, like this beam engine, and we put in like a SCADA interface, HMI, and thanks to some companies and with Schneider as well, we were actually able to simulate the Tridex malware, the Triton malware, and as you can see here, we were running the malware against the beam engine and to say like, hey, we now can actually block the sys controller and everything is fine, but you saw the smoke and the alerts going off. It was already too late, but is there a way we can investigate this? So what we did is we replicated that and we started to actually filter out, as you can see here on the UDP port 1502, and we started to look at the information. So the running state here is where you see the controller is running, and at some point there was a way we can actually write a detection and we can say like, hey, the Triton malware is being detected. So there is a Wireshark dissector for the communication protocol, and by analyzing this, this gave a lot of information that helped us also create signatures for IPS devices, which we distributed amongst our customers. So the funny thing is, and this is thanks to Dragos with the information they had, and also some of the artifacts collected from the ongoing investigation, all the bits and pieces together of the campaign and things like that, there were a few what we call operational intelligence mistakes the actors made when they were attacking this victim. And also, when we analyzed code and compared code with what we've seen before, we were actually discovering that most likely this was coming from the Central Research Institute of Chemistry and Mechanics in Russia. And looking at some of the names here, Alexander Volkov, Juncker, Isli Anatoliev, and Igor Korkin, if you look at their resumes or their blogs or stuff like that, you can actually see they're working all kind of offensive code things like that. Funny story to tell here is that Igor Korkin here on the right sent us at some point his resume and tried to get a job in our team, but we thankfully said no, thank you so much for the honor, but we're not hiring at the moment. And he was actually applying for a job in a different part of ATR, and when I told the hiring manager like who he was dealing with, I think he he got a different color in his face. But and the funny thing is that the people from Dragos told me as well that the moment this research was revealed, all these links and all these photos from the websites have disappeared. So it seems that people were spot on and right about where they thought that the threat was coming from. But it's always fun to see at some point, like we always talk about cyber threat actors and things like that. But sometimes when you see a face behind it, it's giving you a lot of insight as well. So with that being said, this is actually where my presentation ends. So thank you so much for listening. I will hand over the presentation bullet back to the organization, but I saw a lot of questions in the Q&A appearing. So in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I will answer those questions. And if there are questions I cannot answer yet, the team will gather the questions. I will get them by email and I will reply back so they can follow up with you. So thank you so much. And if you want, please stay in touch on Twitter. More than happy to interact. And thank you so much for your presence for this.
Christian, thanks. That was really nice and valuable information. I send you the question to the chat because I cannot resend the translation to Q&A session. So if you will see the chat, the translation from Dmitry, did you see how excluding staff training, this question?
I think I see a lot of questions, so I will try to make the chat window a little bit bigger and then start to answer the questions in the chat window.
Yes, so how excluding staff training and switching to Office 365 to reduce the risks of attacks using macros? Because for many organizations, totally moving to Office 365 is banned by the local restrictions laws. So what is your advice as maybe in best practices?
I would say that there's a lot of, and like we said, like this is not a product pitch presentation or seminar. So to stay generic, there's a lot of endpoint technology these days that will help you block the risks of macros. So for example, I know in our latest released endpoint product, we have put a lot of the things we saw in the field around macros. We have put the detection in there. So that's one example, but there's tons of other endpoint technologies that will definitely can help block and stop early attacks using macros.
Okay, thank you very much. What kind of questions do you see privately as well? You can start from them.
Sorry, which, okay. Can you repeat the question maybe?
Yeah, I see some question. Which solutions checking encrypted files on incoming mail servers?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question. That's more a product question, and I'm not in the products.
Так, это было от пользователей.
I see another question like, do you see malicious apps using DNS over HTTPS for command and control and data extraction, exfiltration? Absolutely, yeah. It's sometimes we see it. It's not very popular yet, but definitely we see sometimes DNS over HTTPS for sure. And there's another question I see is, do you see increase of attacks using extensions and add-ons for browsers? Not that much, to be honest. We don't see those a lot because Google Chrome and Firefox are ramping up their security. So there's a lot of checks going on before you can actually use those extensions and add-ons. So that attack surfaces is very limiting, I would say as well. I think those were the questions I saw in the chat window.
That which was privately to you, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is a DOT? The DOH or DOT?
I don't understand this question, to be honest.
DNS over HTTPS or DNS over TLS?
Okay, get it. It really depends what TLS version you're using, to be honest. And TLS and HTTPS are, of course, related to each other. So it really depends, Levko. It really depends.
Так, Кристиан только что ответил, что это очень индивидуально, зависит от любой от ситуации, где вы это хотите использовать. И также от этого пользователя вопрос о какие решения проверяют зашифрованные архивы. Это более вопрос к пресейл инженеру. Мы давайте обязательно вернемся к нему офлайн, не во время этой презентации. Так, коллеги, пишите еще вопросы в Q&A, если у кого-то не получается, то пишите в чат. I think we have, Christian, around 5-7 minutes more for questions, and then we can move further with another Vlad presentation. Correct?
Yeah.
Коллеги, пожалуйста, пишите еще свои вопросы. Напомню, что в конце данной конференции будут выбраны 5 самых интересных вопросов и будут предоставлены памятные призы от компании OptiData и от компании Приклади. А также в течение нескольких дней после окончания конференции за все ваши отзывы будут собраны и с странички Фейсбука по данному ивенту, и через рандомный розыгрыш призов также будут предоставлены памятные призы 5 участникам, которым оставили на Фейсбуке. So, Christian, if you see any other questions privately to you, because I don't see questions in Q&A or in chat. If you can one more time.
Yeah, there's one question coming from Xenia. In your opinion, does it worth it security-wise to adopt DNS over HTTPS? I am not to be so in-depth into that particular topic, but there's two answers to the question. Like if I look at it from a different way, like to secure DNS over HTTPS, I can imagine you can do that. But on the other hand, you want to also inspect that traffic. If so, there are two, I would say, two sides of the medal, which we call it here. There could be a benefit, but there could also be a disadvantage. So I think it really depends on your business case if you want to adopt DNS over HTTPS, yes or no.
Another was prior Ksenia questions from Artyom. Do you see it from Artyom? For Christian. Currently, a lot of malicious code is officially distributed through the Android or Apple repositories. How can a user protect his data of the application is already a prior trusted by the developer in the repository?
So Apple is really strict about how, if you want to submit an application, for example, for the App Store in Apple, you have to jump through a lot of hula hoops before your code gets accepted, and they retest your code. I would say in Android it's easier because there's a volume of things happening, and it's easier to get your code there. So separate from the discussion if an app is malicious or not, I think your privacy settings on your device is something you really need to look at as well, because we tend to have a lot of things open up on our devices, but that's one step. But on the other hand, like look, if you download an app which is actually abusing those permissions, you won't notice it, and you can actually have some protection on your devices. I know, for example, and I speak from an example here in McAfee. All our company phones have a sort of kind of security program on our phones. So the data is encrypted. There are some settings being blocked, and there are some settings being accepted. And also, if we tend to do something that is maybe suspicious, that activity will be blocked. So that might be something as well to look into for your company.
Okay, thank you very much. And one of the last question from Jean, that statistics which you showed according to the Ukraine attacks, the unique MD5 files. So the access is only available to you and to your team in McAfee?
No, actually not. So yes, we're using it internally, but we have a sub team which is called APG, and they offer custom dashboards like this or access to the data through a commercial offering. So if you want to follow up with some of the sales representatives on this call, they can reach out and we can put you in the right direction if you are interested in that data.
So basically, the organizations in countries, not only Ukraine, yeah, can ask such data, and the McAfee has the department which can provide this data.
It's an internal team, and still that data is of course through a commercial offering, so it's not for free. That data is
yes. Yeah, that's always good to know something new about the company where we work more than 5 years. So I say a lot of thank you. And thank you. Yes. So I don't see any questions anymore. If you don't see Christian, privately send some questions to you in chat on Q&A. Just the final check, and we can switch to another speaker.
Yes, well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I will switch off in a minute or two. So, spasiba, thank you very much, and maybe talk to you next time.